I think there were two. It's a long time ago, mind you. One was on the customer side, the customers being the large corporations that were building big projects and doing it in a very traditional waterfall way. They had all of the experiences that I guess most people in big systems have been accustomed to, of projects being late, of projects turning up not quite meeting the customer need, maybe because the programmers thought, oh, I don't understand it, or they don't mean that, so I'll do what I think. And by the time the projects turned out, the business requirement had changed anyway. We were months and years after the requirement was spec. So there was a real need on the customer side to do things that weren't just waterfall and sequential. I think on the supplier side, and I at the time was one of the supplier community, we all had our own proprietary methods for doing stuff doing projects with our tools. So there was Oracle Case supported by the Oracle method. There was IEF, IEW, and nobody had a public access, openly available method they could turn to without being tied to a particular vendor. So there were drivers from both sides of the market. There were customers that needed a better way of working and delivering systems, and there were suppliers that wanted to sign up to something that helped manage projects in a better way without having to just sell their particular method. And that came together in a hotel room in a meeting of about 40 people in January of 1994, and here we are 20 years on. I think at the time there were probably a couple of reasons. One is we needed to provide a subscription model to fund the activities. I mean, they were relatively modest, but there were administration and method development activities that needed funding in that first year. And so we had a model where organisations could join and subscribe for, depending on their size at a certain level, but also for individuals to become associates and then become full members and accredited and so forth. I think the other driver for membership model was to get more of the intellectual buy-in and the emotional buy-in, whereas someone had to sign up and invest some time, we were more likely to get a good contribution and an investment of some intellectual capacity, not just a passive I'm a member, but so what? I think in the very early days, fair to say mixed. Like any adoption cycle, there were a few early adopters who were very enthusiastic, and they were some of the pioneers of the method and on the first board, British Airways, British Telecom being two particular examples. There were then those that followed on behind once someone else had done it, and we'd got a couple of brand names adopting it. That was important in terms of recognition and credibility. You then had the mass of the followers, some of whom are still introducing DSDM into their organisations as we speak. And there are some real laggards who still think it's all a bit newfangled and, give me a good old structured waterfall method. So it's been a journey, clearly, of adoption, but thankfully we had those early pioneers. It would be remiss of me to say that we were thinking 20 years ahead. We certainly weren't. And we weren't thinking really beyond the systems domain. It was, as the title then said, a dynamic systems development method. Where it's gone in terms of business projects, the wider Agile community, the Agile Alliance, that would all have been a pipe dream in the early mid-90s. But looking back and understanding where it has been applied and where it could now be applied into business projects or sustainability projects, maybe not construction like that large structure behind us, but who knows, user input and iterative design may well have been used in putting the shard together. Wouldn't have dreamt it. Oh, absolutely still scope. I'm still involved in systems in large organisations, and I see all sorts of opportunity for adoption. Just a couple of recent examples, one of which I was very close to as an observer, another of which we've all observed. Large financial services company, use their own internal life cycle, very waterfall, beautifully documented, 1,000 pages of requirements, £15 million, and 18 months later the project was canned, and it was all beautifully documented as a process as well as the requirements, and it never worked and got written off, and we then stepped in and built one properly. So absolutely there's scope in larger companies and as well as mid-sized, smaller companies for DSDM still to be adopted. I think the other wider point is around government and connecting for health. There's a particular example of taxpayers' money being sent down the Swanee, anywhere between 6 and 13 billion, depending on whose number you believe. And they've not retrieved £100 million worth of value out of that project. Now, clearly, government should be looking at a sensible adoption of DSDM and DSDM methods. I'm afraid to say it's true. I can't remember the day, but it was November of 1993. We lived in a small village in Gloucestershire at the time, and it was a sort of eureka moment. Goodness knows what goes on in my head and why that popped in during the time in the shower. You'll be pleased to hear I didn't jump out the shower, run down the road shouting eureka, but I did manage to orchestrate some like-minded souls who thought, yes, this was probably quite a good idea, without telling them the shower story.